I never thought I'd live to see the day when a landlocked nation with fewer people than Chicago would single-handedly shatter America's century-old grip on South American security. But that day arrived 96 hours ago when Bolivia's President Luis Arce signed Executive Decree 5247, permanently expelling all U.S. military personnel and intelligence assets from Bolivian territory. This isn't just another anti-American gesture from a leftist government. This is the moment Washington's Monroe Doctrine died in the Andes, and most Americans don't even realize it yet. I was monitoring secure Pentagon communications when the first reports came through. At 1442 La Paz time, Bolivian military units surrounded the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration compound in Santa Cruz. By 1515, American Special Operations advisors were being escorted to waiting aircraft under armed guard. By 1630, the last CIA station chief in Bolivia was airborne, clutching a briefcase of shredded documents. The speed wasn't accidental. This was surgical precision, designed to prevent any U.S. counter-response, and it worked flawlessly. What terrifies Pentagon strategists isn't the expulsion itself, it's what the expulsion represents. For the first time since World War II, a South American nation has completely severed its security relationship with the United States, while simultaneously deepening military cooperation with China and Russia. Bolivia just proved that American hemispheric dominance is negotiable, and other nations are taking notes. Let me walk you through the strategic earthquake that just reshaped South American geopolitics. This expulsion wasn't an emotional outburst or populist grandstanding. It was the culmination of a 3-year intelligence operation designed to systematically eliminate American influence while establishing alternative security partnerships that make U.S. retaliation impossible. The operation began in 2021 when Bolivia quietly signed what they called a technical cooperation agreement with China's People's Liberation Army. On paper, it covered infrastructure development and disaster relief. In reality, Chinese military engineers began constructing what intelligence sources describe as the most sophisticated surveillance and communications network in South America. By 2022, Russian military advisors were training Bolivian special forces in counterinsurgency operations. The training took place in remote altiplano bases that American satellites couldn't penetrate. What those advisors were actually teaching became clear this week: how to neutralize American intelligence assets without triggering immediate retaliation. The final piece fell into place 6 months ago when Iran began supplying Bolivia with advanced radar systems and electronic warfare capabilities. Officially, these were for border security. Unofficially, they created a detection grid that made American reconnaissance operations impossible and gave Bolivia real-time intelligence on U.S. military movements throughout the region. Washington never saw the trap closing because Washington assumed Bolivia was too small, too poor, and too isolated to challenge American hegemony. That assumption just cost us our entire South American intelligence network. Here's what nobody in Washington wants to admit: the expulsion succeeded because Bolivia had already replaced American security guarantees with alternatives that work better. Chinese infrastructure investment provides economic stability without IMF conditionality. Russian military cooperation offers advanced weapons without human rights lectures. Iranian technology transfers come without democracy promotion requirements. Bolivia didn't choose to be anti-American. America became irrelevant to Bolivian security needs. The Pentagon's response has been chaotic and increasingly desperate. Emergency meetings with Southern Command, frantic calls to neighboring governments, threats of economic sanctions that everyone knows will be ineffective because Bolivia's economy is now integrated with China, not the United States. But the most telling indicator of American panic is what's happening in other South American capitals. Peru quietly suspended joint military exercises with U.S. forces scheduled for next month. Ecuador canceled a $400 million arms purchase from American contractors and opened negotiations with Russian suppliers. Even Colombia, America's most reliable regional ally, is reportedly reassessing its security cooperation agreements. The domino effect isn't theoretical, it's happening in real time. Bolivia's success proves something that terrifies American strategists. Small nations can achieve complete independence from U.S. influence if they're willing to accept alternative patrons and endure short-term economic pressure. More dangerously, it proves that American retaliation has limits when targeted nations have prepared adequate defenses. For the first time since the Cold War, American hegemony in its own hemisphere faces systematic challenge from powers that can provide real alternatives to U.S. partnership, and Bolivia just demonstrated that those alternatives work. The intelligence implications are staggering. Every CIA operation in South America for the past decade has been compromised. Every asset, every source, every communication channel Bolivia had access to is now in Chinese and Russian hands. American intelligence agencies are operating blind in a region they've controlled for a century. China is studying Bolivia's model for application in Southeast Asia and Africa. Russia is adapting Bolivian tactics for use in Central Asia and Eastern Europe. Iran is sharing Bolivia's electronic warfare techniques with allies throughout the Middle East. The template is spreading because the template works. And Washington has no counter strategy that doesn't risk escalating conflicts they cannot win. Bolivia's successful defiance represents a fundamental shift in how smaller nations view their relationship with great powers. For decades, the assumption has been that alignment with the United States provides optimal security and economic benefits. Bolivia has shattered that assumption by demonstrating that alternative alignments can provide superior outcomes. The economic dimension cannot be overstated. Bolivia's lithium reserves, critical for electric vehicle battery production, are now exclusively accessible through Chinese-controlled supply chains. American technology companies dependent on lithium-ion batteries suddenly find themselves reliant on a resource network that explicitly excludes American influence. This resource nationalism represents a new form of warfare that traditional American military superiority cannot address. You cannot bomb your way to lithium access when the lithium-controlling nation possesses advanced air defenses and alternative security guarantees. Bolivia has weaponized resource scarcity against American technological dependence. Regional allies are watching Bolivia's success and recalculating their own strategic positions. Brazil's military leadership is reportedly studying Bolivian air defense integration. Argentine defense officials have quietly requested briefings on Bolivian counter-surveillance techniques. Chilean copper mining consortiums are exploring Chinese security partnerships modeled on Bolivia's framework. The cascading effect extends beyond military cooperation into fundamental questions of international law and sovereignty. Bolivia's expulsion was conducted entirely within legal frameworks that make American retaliation legally problematic. Every action taken by Bolivian forces adhered strictly to international law regarding foreign military presence on sovereign territory. This legal warfare dimension represents sophisticated understanding of international systems that smaller powers can exploit against larger ones. Bolivia's legal strategy was designed by teams of international lawyers who spent months crafting legally bulletproof justifications for every action taken. The timing was equally calculated to maximize American strategic disadvantage. The operation occurred during American military deployment rotations that left Southern Command temporarily understaffed. Intelligence assets were eliminated during a period when American satellite coverage was compromised by atmospheric conditions. This temporal warfare demonstrates planning sophistication that suggests extensive Chinese and Russian strategic consultation. Bolivia didn't develop these capabilities independently. The expulsion represents the culmination of multi-year preparation involving the most advanced strategic planning capabilities that America's primary competitors possess. The most terrifying aspect for American strategists is the scalability of Bolivia's success. The economic, military, and legal frameworks that enabled Bolivian independence are available to any nation willing to accept Chinese, Russian, and Iranian partnership. The template requires no unique Bolivian characteristics. It can be replicated by any government with sufficient political will and strategic patience. Standing in my office at the University of Chicago, looking at intelligence reports that confirm America's complete intelligence failure in Bolivia, I'm struck by a historical parallel that should alarm every strategic thinker in Washington. In 1956, Britain learned at Suez that imperial power depends on local consent and international support. When both disappear simultaneously, even superpowers become powerless. Britain never recovered its imperial reach after that humiliation. Bolivia may be America's Suez moment, the revelation that hegemony depends on factors we no longer control and assumptions that are no longer valid. The question isn't whether we can reverse Bolivia's expulsion. The question is whether we can prevent other nations from following Bolivia's example. Based on current intelligence assessments and strategic trends, the answer appears to be no. Bolivia's success creates incentives for resistance that American threats can no longer deter effectively. The age of uncontested American hemispheric dominance just ended in the mountains of South America. The expulsion of American military forces from Bolivia represents more than tactical defeat. It represents the emergence of a new international order where American hegemony is optional rather than inevitable, where smaller powers can achieve genuine independence through careful alliance selection and strategic preparation. Bolivia's success will inspire similar resistance movements throughout the developing world. The template is established, the methods are proven, and the alternative partnerships are available. American power projection faces systematic challenge from powers that offer competitive alternatives without traditional American constraints. The Monroe Doctrine didn't just die in Bolivia. It was methodically dismantled by powers that understand American weaknesses better than America understands its own vulnerabilities. The century of American hemispheric dominance is ending not with dramatic military defeat, but with the quiet recognition that dominance was always dependent on consent that is no longer forthcoming.